Today's story comes from someone who worked retail for almost 3 years. And it's a perfect example of what happens when a manager makes a rule so strict, he forgets it applies to him too. Our narrator worked at a mid-sized electronics store, the kind that sells everything from phone chargers to televisions. Returns without a receipt were always a gray area. Sometimes the store would make an exception, sometimes not, depending on who was working and how busy the day was. That inconsistency finally caught up with the store one Saturday, when a customer got loud and abusive at the counter after being told his no-receipt return wouldn't be accepted. The district manager happened to be visiting that day, saw the whole thing, and decided enough was enough. He called a mandatory staff meeting the next morning and laid down a new rule, effective immediately. No exceptions, ever. No receipt, no return, full stop. He said it slowly, so nobody could claim they misunderstood. He said employees who broke this rule, even once, even for a really convincing story, even for a manager, would be written up. He specifically used the phrase, even for a manager, because he wanted everyone to know this wasn't just a rule for customers, it was a rule for staff behavior too. No favoritism, no soft exceptions, no using your position to get around it. Our narrator, and everyone else in that meeting, wrote the policy down word for word. No receipt, no return, no exceptions, from the district manager himself. Fast forward about 6 weeks. The district manager doesn't work at this particular store day to day. He oversees several locations, so most days our narrator doesn't see him at all. But one afternoon, he walks in, not in his usual suit, in jeans, clearly on a personal errand, holding a soundbar in its original box. Novak, no receipt. He walks straight up to the counter where our narrator is working and says he needs to return it. No receipt, but it's fine. He'll just note it in the system himself since he's the one who approves exceptions anyway. Our narrator asked what the reason for the return was. He said it didn't work with his TV. Wrong input. He'd grabbed a wrong one. Simple mistake. Could she just process it? She pulled up the system to check if it was even purchased at this location, and it wasn't. The SKU wasn't in their inventory history at all, meaning it had likely been bought at a completely different store, maybe not even the same chain. Normally, this alone would be enough to deny nearly any return, receipt, or not. But she didn't even need to get into that. She just calmly reminded him of the policy he'd personally announced 6 weeks earlier in front of the entire staff. No receipt, no return, no exceptions, not even for management. He laughed it off at first, said obviously that rule was for customers trying to scam the store. Not for him. He wasn't trying to scam anyone. He just needed a quick favor. She said she understood, but the policy, as written and as stated by him, didn't have a carve-out for that. He asked her to just make an exception this once. She said she couldn't because he was the one who'd told the entire staff that any employee who made an exception for anyone, including management, would be written up. She wasn't trying to be difficult. She was just following the rule exactly the way he had given it to her. At this point, he got visibly annoyed and asked to speak to whoever was managing the store that day. The assistant store manager came out, heard the situation, and made the same call: no receipt, no return, official policy, no exceptions. The district manager pushed harder, saying this was ridiculous. He wasn't some random customer. He literally created the rule and could obviously override it if he wanted to. And that's exactly where things got complicated for him, because store policy also required any manager overriding a no-receipt return to log the override, their employee ID, the reason, and a supervisor signature, specifically to prevent managers from quietly approving returns for friends or themselves. If he wanted an exception, he'd have to formally document that he personally overrode the rule he'd made specifically to prevent that kind of override. He didn't want that on record, so he left without the return, clearly frustrated, muttering that he'd handle it corporate side. Here's the thing about announcing a strict, no exceptions rule loudly and publicly, specifically to prove a point about fairness. Everyone remembers it, word for word, especially when you make a show of saying it applies to management too. Our narrator wasn't being petty. She wasn't trying to embarrass him. She simply did precisely what he told an entire room full of employees to do. Using his own words, in a situation he clearly hadn't imagined would ever involve him personally. A few days later, corporate did get involved, but not the way he was hoping. Another store manager mentioned the incident to a regional operations coordinator, who pulled the return logs and noticed the item wasn't even purchased at their chain in the first place. That raised a bigger question about where exactly he'd gotten a soundbar with their box and packaging, which turned into its own small investigation about internal product allocation. Our narrator wasn't part of that mess at all. She'd simply followed the rule, exactly as told, and stepped back while the district manager's own policy quietly did the rest of the work for her. The most satisfying part, she said, wasn't even the return being denied. It was watching him try to talk his way around a rule he'd been so proud of 30 seconds earlier, and realizing, in real time, that he'd built it too well to bend for himself. If you got a story like this, drop in the comments. We might feature it in a future video. And if you want more stories like this one, make sure you're subscribed, because we got a new one coming tomorrow.